Hi there, hockey fans, and welcome to our special edition NHL free agency podcast brought to you by RotoWire. As you can tell, I'm not Paul Bruno, who is enjoying the offseason right now. So, RotoWire's Ken Kreitz, who some of you may know better as K Train from our NHL podcast, or NBA podcast, rather. So Ken's going to join me today as we kind of go through the biggest news from the last couple of days of free agency. Ken, thanks for hopping on today.
Hey, pleasure to join, AJ. Thanks for having me. I am definitely no Paul Bruno. Paul, hello. I hope Toronto's treating you well. I do have a painful Washington Capitals playoff fandom history. Goes back to being a 10-year-old, almost getting decapitated by a puck at the old Cap Center. That's a long story we won't go into. I ducked at the right time. But anyway, hey, let's dive into free agency, AJ. Not the frenzy we were certainly hoping for, especially not on day one. A little slower. Some news last night. What do you think, though, were the factors in us having a somewhat sedate free agent period?
Well, I think the biggest factor, obviously, is the flat cap. Of course, teams, go into the offseason, planning for the future and expecting those revenues to constantly go up, whether it's a couple mil or whatever. But the flat cap is really a big factor here. The other thing was the lack of the interview period. Normally, there's that 3 to 5 day window where teams get the opportunity to start negotiating with those free agents. We saw Alex Petrangelo. It was after free agency opened when reports came out that he flew to Vegas to meet with them, and we'll get into that deal later. But that no interview period, and then Seattle expansion. One of the things we've seen a ton of are more and more 2-year deals this season than really ever before, and a lot of that has to do so the teams have the right number of signed guys that they can expose. Interesting with some of these NHL deals here. We're seeing very backloaded contracts. The first year of a lot of these contracts are really low amounts. For example, Matt Murray is only, I say only in quotes here, only making $4 million in year one because the escrow amounts are going to be 20% this upcoming season. So they're planning for the future when the escrow amounts are expected to drop back down to pretty normal levels. So guys' contracts are really backloaded. So that's kind of been what we've seen here.
And the player union really can't gripe. I mean, the Kraken certainly create a lot more roster spots, a lot more players making NHL money. So net, good for them. But you're right, certainly has a big impact short term on this free agency window. You mentioned Petrangelo. That is kind of our biggest news. Didn't happen on day one, day two, or day three, but it kicked in last night. Signs a huge 7-year, $61+ million contract with the Golden Knights. How do you think he fits in with Vegas?
Yeah, I mean, really, that was the deal that we've been waiting for all offseason. Was he going to return to St. Louis or not? Obviously, the Blues went in a different direction. But I think the biggest impact here is for fantasy owners is going to be anybody that's got Shea Weber. If you were thinking about maybe keeping him, I think maybe not at this point. Now, obviously, dynasty formats where you're keeping your whole team don't go out and drop Shea Weber right away. But for people in kind of those, trying to pick your keepers, I think Petrangelo slots in as that first, quarterback power play guy on the number one unit. Now, they could go with 2 defensemen up top, certainly an option for them. But I would expect that we're going to see Shea Theodore manning the second unit here. And that's a big impact in terms of his fantasy value.
Are you surprised that the Blues didn't make Petrangelo a bigger priority?
Well, I think you're seeing, the cap crunch here in effect. I think in a normal year where the amount of money that they had to spend goes up, I think they consider going with a big deal like this. He's going to make over $8 million a year in terms of the average annual value, and they probably would have considered giving him they can give that extra year too. So maybe they would have offered an 8-year closer to 8 million, a little bit lower and give him that extra year, but it's just not possible in the current cap crunch. And so they went with a more discounted option, and ultimately it may be the right move for them.
Interesting. Let's shift gears into forwards here. Biggest contract went to Taylor Hall. What do you think about his 1 year, $8 million deal with Buffalo?
The biggest surprise here was all in the lead up to his new deal, and all the talks around that was that he wasn't going to take a short-term deal, that he was going to hold out,
Right.
get that long-term contract, but instead went, with just a 1 year. Now reports are that the Sabres offered him his choice of 1 or 2 years. So clearly he's, betting on himself here with the 1 year, $8 million deal. Who knows? Maybe Taylor Hall wants to go play in Seattle. That 1 year deal would allow him to sign with them, or obviously he's hoping that the cap situation moves forward and moves up, and he can sign a bigger, longer term deal in the future. But really, it was surprising to see just a 1 year contract when everything coming from his camp in the lead up was that he didn't want that short term deal.
I mean, in general, I'm fiscally conservative, and I always think from the player's standpoint they should sign those additional years. But in this particular situation, I think the market's going to be way more to the player's advantage next year with Seattle bidding on folks. I think it's smart, especially if he's not married to that Buffalo marketplace. All right, let's move on. St. Louis, back to St. Louis. They did sign a big signing, I think. Torrey Krug. You see him as a viable replacement?
I really do. I think he can, take over as the number one power play guy for them. I don't think he's going to put up the same numbers, nearly that you got from Petrangelo, but he's certainly a solid producer. And look, they're paying over $2 million less a year for Torrey Krug than they are or would have for Petrangelo here. And so, he's a solid 9 goals, 40 assists this last season. That's good numbers. 28 of his 49 points came on the power play. So I really think he's capable of slotting in and filling that role for them.
Bruins fans here in New England love Krug. A lot of bemoaning this morning at my old man breakfast at the local diner for that move. So, I think it's smart for St. Louis. I do hate it when a team moves on from their captain, but it does seem net like money-wise, this is a smart move. Let's move on here. In the end, which deals do you think will look back upon favorably with money terms in mind here when this is all said and done, AJ?
Well, I think first and foremost, you got to look at the Bobby Ryan contract. He's coming in for a 1 year deal at Detroit for $1 million. Obviously, money, that sounds strange to say, but money not a huge factor for him in terms of what he's getting, because he's still going to be paid by Ottawa after the buyout. So he didn't need to sign a big deal with the next club. It's really a tryout with Detroit. Obviously he had the personal issues he dealt with last season. So I think this is a great value signing by Detroit and a really good deal for him as well. Kevin LeBlanc signed a 4-year deal coming in under $5 million a year. I think that's going to end up, maybe it seems a little high in year one here. But by the time that deal rounds out, I think he can be a solid top 6 contributor for them. And they're going to think that they're getting him for a steal on that one. Another player, kind of similar vein, is Jasper Fast signing with Carolina. 3 years, $6 million. So again, just $2 million annually for a guy that can be, I think, a 30-point producer. Look, he came up a point shy of that, just 29 points this year, but he only had 69 games to do it. So you give him a full season. I don't think 15 goals and 35, maybe even pushing 40 points is out of the question for him. And then finally, Branden Holtby gets the deal with Vancouver. I know that's
killer. How is number 70 going to be anything but red? Hate it.
Oh, I know you Caps fans, Rangers fans going to have to look at Henrik Lundqvist in a different jersey. Corey Crawford is in a different jersey. It's been a weird offseason.
Lundqvist did not win us the cup, baby.
But yeah, I mean, Holtby's deal for Vancouver, they're only committed to him for 2 years at 30 years of age. So, they're getting prime years. I honestly was surprised that Washington didn't want him back. For Vancouver's standpoint, Thatcher Demko is the heir apparent there, but this pushes off his need to take over as the number one for 2 more years. It's cost controlled. And look, again, I mentioned the 2 year. He doesn't have a full no move clause. He's got a very limited no trade clause, But because it's not a no move clause, he can be exposed in that Vegas expansion or Seattle expansion draft, excuse me. And I really think he will be. They'll protect Demko unless something comes off the rails in terms of his development, and then they'll leave Holtby available. There's going to be a lot of options, I think, for the Kraken in terms of who to pick.
I mean, you rattled off what I view as a lot of value signings for teams. It's kind of odd one or two more teams didn't take advantage of this, but I guess rest. A lot of value out there, and yes, I'll still be crying tears when the season starts about Holtby in a different sweater. That's really hard to believe. Glad you brought up goalies, AJ. A lot of movement there. A lot of movement with veteran goalies, Holtby just being one of them. Who do you think made the best move between the pipes, and what teams do you sort of question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I like the Holtby move. I just expounded on that. I think Lundqvist still has a chance to compete for the starting job with the Caps. I don't think it's open and shut that Ilya Samsonov takes over as the number one. He'll certainly get every opportunity to, but I imagine he'll be on a short leash. If he stumbles, why would you not put King Henrik in net for you? And then
certainly
Cam Talbot.
It's got to suppress his fantasy value when you don't know his quantity of starts, right, AJ?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing to remember is we're talking about a potentially condensed NHL schedule. If teams are playing, 4 games in 7 nights or even less, we could see a lot more back-to-backs, a lot more of the number 2 guys going. So I think it's going to be hard to find guys that are going to start, 60 games this year. Cam Talbot is one of those guys, started 73 games back a couple of years ago. He'll take over as the number 1 in the Wild. I think that's a good spot for him as well.
With a consolidated schedule, does that change your draft strategy a bit, AJ, where maybe you're going to take goalies a little higher, guys that will get a high amount of starts?
I definitely think you have to consider that. And really, there's going to be a select few guys that I think are going to even get close to 55 next year. Now, obviously, if the schedule's not as condensed, that changes. But you're looking at, Vasilevsky. His value is already through the roof because he's fantastic. But you may want to consider first round pick for him. Connor Hellebuyck's another guy who I think could really be one of the few seeing that many starts. I mean, we saw that with, I'll mention the third and those 2 guys and Tuukka Rask were the 3 Vezina Trophy finalists this year, and Rask started 40-some games. So really, I think you're going to see more and more of that. There's not going to be a lot of guys pushing for 55 or even 60 games this season.
You think Rask standing in Boston is solid or not? Interesting playoffs for Tuukka.
Yeah. I mean, everything that they're saying, they're saying all the right things, that he's going to be back. They want him to be a part of their team, that they support his decision. So at this point, there's no reason to think they're not going to. But let's be clear, Yaroslav Halak has proven himself to be capable of carrying the load for them if they want to go in a different direction. For my money, again, going back to the condensed schedule, if I'm running the Bruins, I'd rather have Rask and Halak. Whether your feelings got hurt with him moving, right, I'd rather do that than go with Halak and Daniel Vladar to be the number 2 there.
It's not like Halak, a 3-year-old comer. So here, Washington, for instance. All right, well, which hockey teams, though, do you feel like they made some bad moves with their goalie situation?
Well, look, I mean, our loyal listeners know I'm a huge Pens fan, but the Matt Murray, I think could end up well for them for Ottawa, but the decision there to go with Murray for the term and cost they gave him is certainly questionable. I obviously think Marc-Andre Fleury still has plenty in the tank, so I don't think Vegas needed to sign Robin Lehner to a big deal, but they're obviously moving on there as well. And then Edmonton not really doing anything. They're going to bring back Mike Smith. They're going to stick with the same goalies. And in my opinion, they're going to waste another year of Connor McDavid's prime.
Scratch my back with a hacksaw. I just wanted to throw in my one Penguin soundbite there before while you mentioned the Pens. All right, great. So, hey, there's still some guys going unsigned. Who are some top targets that are still out there, AJ?
Yeah, number one, in my opinion, has got to be Mike Hoffman. He's going to be a 30 goal scorer, I think, in the upcoming season easily. He had 29 this year. Again, a few more games, he gets to 30. And that would have been back-to-back 30-goal seasons for him. So there's a guy that really is going to improve any team, immediate top six, possibly even top line guy, depending on where he lands. His former teammate, Evgeny Dadonov, also a top target there. Florida has clearly moved in a different direction. The door's shut on maybe one of these guys coming back to the Panthers, but I doubt they're both going to come back. Andreas Athanasiou was not given the qualifying offer there in Edmonton, so he's free to sign wherever he would like. And then in terms of top blue liners remaining, I think you got to look at Sami Vatanen. He missed a good chunk of last season due to injury, but I think he's capable of running a power play somewhere as well. So really, keep an eye on these guys. And the thing I'll say, at least about Hoffman and Dadonov, in terms of your fantasy value here, I don't think it matters where these guys land. They're both going to be top six. They're both going to be on the number one power play unit. So regardless of where they land, these are guys that are capable of producing. Look, Hoffman a year while playing for a just disastrous Ottawa team. So, I mean, look, the guy can score wherever he lands. So if you're worried about that.
Any predictions on where you think Hoffman goes?
I don't. He's been one of the few that there hasn't been a lot of rumblings about where he might land. Maybe I'm not looking at the right sources, but I think that it's wide open. Obviously, some teams like Vegas doesn't really have any money left to sign him. So there's certainly teams that are out in terms of value, but
I wonder if he's going for multi-year and the only thing available is short-term stuff, and he might find the market just doesn't agree with what he sees as his value.
Yep, I totally think that's fair. And the longer it takes for him to pick somewhere, I think the worse it's going to get. You're going to have less and less teams able to bid on it, and that's why I was kind of surprised how big Petrangelo's deal ended up being, because the door had already closed on St. Louis. A couple other teams that were in on him went a different direction. So, I think the market's only going to get worse the longer it takes him to find somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I should have had my Jaromir Jagr bobblehead join us for the podcast. He's unfortunately, it's in his Capitals uniform, but in the ugly blue and black phase we had.
Oh, no.
Back to the red. But that's when Jaromir was with us, so what are you going to do? It doesn't show enough of the flowing mullet either. I could go for a little more mullet on that bobblehead. Anyway, I'm definitely off on a tangent. All right, so hey, obviously trades are a big part of free agency as well. Biggest one, Stasi returning to the Jets. Is this a good move for Winnipeg?
I really think it is. I mean, they haven't had like a clear second line center since Stastny left previously after his brief stint with them. So, they
certainly know what they're getting, right?
Yes. Yeah. They know the player that they're getting. It allows them to move Blake Wheeler back to the right wing on the first line. I think Stastny is a better center option than what they have to pair with Patrick Laine. I mean, at this point, it doesn't seem like they're going to trade Laine, although the rumors were all over the place. And look, they've used Brian Little in that spot periodically, but his career, unfortunately, it looks like is going to be over due to that injury. So they didn't have a better option, in my opinion, to fit there, which is why we saw Blake Wheeler there anyway. So I think, in terms of your fantasy value, this is huge for Wheeler and Mark Scheifele. Those two guys play phenomenal together. The Winnipeg Jets, for whatever reason, are like the unknown team in terms of fantasy. These guys fly under the radar, and they really shouldn't. So really, if you're in a league, first, second round picks on Scheifele or Wheeler is not a bad way to use those.
Smart, AJ. Smart. Thank you. Let's talk another trade. A little surprised about Brandon Saad leaving Chicago for Colorado. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the weird part is like Chicago always brings guys back, and Brandon Saad was one of those, but now he's leaving again. The other weird part about this trade, if I'm being perfectly honest, is the return here. I get their blue line is a little outdated. And Nikita Zadorov is a solid addition to that blue line, but I don't know that it really fixes everything. And are you really better without Brandon Saad on the team? I'm not so sure. Now, one thing I will say is if you look at what Chicago's done and you wrap in the Ole Mata trade, then it looks a little bit better when you consider, that you improved your blue line for sure by getting rid of Olamata and replacing him with Zadorov. So I guess you can look at it
They
that way
needed
and
to
it
clear up
becomes
money.
better.
Was it a bit of a salary move, you think?
It definitely was. Yeah, there was certainly a factor there. They're still going to retain about $1 million of his cap hit. So yeah, we got to consider all the those in terms of the situation. But I do think I definitely don't think it makes them better.
Got it. Got it. And hey, so we've covered a lot, but are there any signings or trades that occurred the last 4 or 5 days that you think might fly under the radar in most fantasy circles, but you think we should point out?
Yeah, the big one I'll mention is Alex Wynn, Florida. Another guy that didn't need to cash in a huge deal, 1 year, 2.25 million, because he's going to get that buyout money as well. Kyle Turris going to Edmonton. Again, another guy that got bought out, signed for a pretty minimal deal. I think he'll really help them in their top six, and he's got the flexibility to play wing as well. And then the
It's like
other
a great
question,
low risk move.
yeah, both of those. No, if it doesn't work out, you're only committed to them for one. I think Turris is 2 years.
Cheap use.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's cheap, and hey, if it doesn't work out, you expose them in the draft, right?
Yeah.
And they'll probably consider taking him.
What do you think my Quebecois friends are going to make of Montreal's recent moves?
So the one kind of question mark for me, the Toffoli signing, I like in a bubble when you consider it just as itself. I like the signing, 4 years, 17 million overall. It's pretty cost effective. The question for me is where you're putting Toffoli after you traded Max Domi for Josh Anderson. Only one of these guys is going to play top six. You're not taking Tatar, Gallagher, or Jonathan Drouin out. I mean, I guess, could you move Toffoli to center? But I don't think you want to knock Nick Suzuki out of the second line center spot. So that was really the biggest question mark for me is like which one of these guys goes into the top six, and that's going to be something you're really going to want to watch in terms of fantasy value for these guys because the third line definitely, in my opinion, drops off a little bit here compared to the second.
It's too bad our favorite Torontoan, Paul Bruno, isn't here to trash the Canadiens. I know he would have enjoyed. All right, well, let's wrap things up here, AJ. We say it wasn't a frenetic or crazy free agent period, but still plenty of player movement. What are your final thoughts for fantasy players as we wrap up today's segment?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just going to be to remember where your goalies ended up, right? There's a lot of guys wearing different sweaters for the first time in over a decade. And so, yeah, keeping a track on that. And I'll just make another pitch to check out RotoWire.com. We are constantly updating our depth charts to see where guys fit in. If you look right now, we have Toffoli in the second line wing spot over Josh Anderson. But if anything indicates that that's changing, these are constantly being updated with your latest player news. And we have all the signings, all the details on any trades you can find at RotoWire.com.
Yeah, AJ's a big part of those depth chart moves. If you're a fan of AJ, you'll like his work there. And we got to put a word in, of course, for our lineup optimizer for all our daily fantasy NHL fans out there. One of our most popular pages on the site, certainly within the hockey section. All right, AJ, we're looking forward to another exciting season with you and Paul on the podcast. Thanks for letting me join in today. And I think that's a wrap on today's free agent discussion.
Yeah, thanks. Had to get it in there. Yeah, thanks for jumping in today, Ken, and running through this exciting weekend. As you said, Paul Bruno will be back when we kick off our preseason previews this fall. And as a reminder, we're always willing to chat hockey with you, our loyal listeners, on Twitter. You can follow me, AJ Scholz, at AJ Scholz24, and you can follow Paul at Statsman22. Ken, do you want to toss in your handle real quick if they need basketball?
Instead, I'll suggest that the hockey fans who don't subscribe to RotoWire, please go to rotowire.com/win for a free 10-day trial. Or I think /pod might also work. Is that right, AJ?
Yep, /pod/free. There's a ton of ways to find it. I guess we'll make a pitch to use /pod so that they're coming from us. But yeah, we look forward to being back with you for another exciting NHL season. Thanks for tuning in.